What would you do if the person you nearly died for looked you in the face, didn't recognize you, and calmly sentenced you to drown? Because that's the kind of heartbreak punch this 2026 drama, Anak Kembar Rahasia Binatang, opens up and then just keeps twisting like a knife you didn't know was still in you. Welcome back to Bongo Gaming, and yes, I actually sat with this one, the kind of fantasy melodrama that sounds ridiculous on paper until it suddenly isn't, because it starts hitting very real nerves: abandonment, survival, motherhood, power, and the way justice becomes a costume people wear when they don't want to admit they are wrong. If you enjoy reviews that are more story-filled than plot homework, consider subscribing. And for spoilers, let's keep it moderate. I'm going to talk about the core setup and a couple of the big early-shaping moments that the premise itself basically gives away, but I'm not going to pretend I know details the show doesn't hand us in the summary, and I'm not here to ruin every last turn for you. The backbone is brutally simple. 7 years ago, Jane falls into the Jurang Iblis, literally, Devil's Abyss, for Darius. That phrasing matters. Not because of him. For him. It paints her choice as active devotion, not an accident, and the show leans into that as tragedy instead of romance. She survives, but she comes out blind, scarred, full of wounds that aren't just on the skin. And then, this is the part that makes you sit up, she's left behind. Abandoned. Like the sacrifice was useful right up until it became inconvenient. Now she's in hiding, raising twin children who are half dragon. That's already a wild sentence to say out loud, but the series doesn't treat it like a gimmick, it treats it like a secret that can either be their death sentence or their one sliver of power. The twins aren't just cute fantasy kids. They are living evidence of a past that someone powerful would rather erase. And here's where the show gets mean in a way that I kind of respected. The twins steal Darius's cond, basically a hair ornament, the kind of personal royal item that carries status, ownership, maybe even symbolic authority depending on how you read it, to save Jane. Survival crime. Desperation theft. The kind of act that, in a fair world, would come with questions before punishment. Instead, they are judged as thieves. And Darius, our beast king figure, our power at the top of the food chain, hands down a sentence to drown Jane, without knowing she's their mother. Let me just pause on that, because it's the engine of the whole emotional machine. The show isn't asking, will he find out? It's asking, how many times can a system destroy the same woman before it finally notices she was human? That's nastier. And more interesting. The pacing, at least in the way the storyline is structured, has this elastic tension to it. It starts with past trauma, snaps into present-day secrecy, then escalates fast once the cond is taken. It's not a slow-burn political chess drama, it's more like a survival melodrama inside a fantasy skin, and it moves like one. When it drags, because yes, sometimes drags, it's in the emotional holding patterns, where you can feel the story circling the same wound: Jane's devotion, Jane's loss, Jane's silence. But when it hits with the gut-drop feeling you get when a character's worst fear becomes procedure. And wait, because this is where my feelings got complicated, the show could have made Darius a cartoon villain. It doesn't have to. The premise basically invites the easy route: evil king punishes innocent woman, boo. But what I found more compelling is how the setup positions him as the embodiment of a law that doesn't care who you are. He isn't just cruel, he's insulated. He's the kind of person power manufactures, someone who can condemn without curiosity. That's not a mustache twirl. That's a mirror. Jane, as a character, is written to carry an almost unbearable amount of suffering, and normally I get annoyed when a drama stacks misery like it's trying to win a contest. But here it's at least anchored to a very specific kind of trauma, the betrayal that makes you stop trusting your own memories. Like, did I love the wrong person? Did I misread everything? Did I jump into the abyss for someone who never existed? That's the emotional poison she's living with, and raising children on top of that is, honestly, it's horrifying in a quiet way. You can feel it even in how she would have to move through space as a blind woman in hiding. The best performances in roles like this aren't about waving your hands around and acting blind. It's in the micro decisions, the way your shoulders tighten before you turn, the way your fingertips ghost the edge of a surface without fully committing, the way your head angles toward sound like you're reading the air. If the actress playing Jane nails that physical truth, especially while also projecting the fierce, "don't come near my kids" energy, then the whole show instantly levels up. Because the relationship that really matters, more than any romance, is Jane and the twins. And I love that the twins aren't framed as passive baggage. They steal to save her. That's not naughty children. That's children raised inside scarcity, learning that morality is sometimes a luxury. If you've ever grown up with that kind of pressure, where doing the right thing didn't keep you safe, this part lands in an uncomfortably real way, even with dragon blood in the mix. Here's the question the show keeps poking: if the twins are half dragon, what does inheritance mean in this world? Not money. Not titles. Inheritance of violence. Inheritance of punishment. Inheritance of being feared before you do anything wrong. That's a theme fantasy stories love to flirt with, but this one has the bones to actually bite down on it. Visually, the story begs for contrast. The Jurang Iblis in the past should feel like a mouth, darkness that swallows sound, cold light that doesn't comfort, the kind of space where you can't tell if you're falling or floating because the world has no reference points. Then the present-day hiding life should feel cramped and textured, fabric, rough wood, breathy quiet, the constant hush of "don't be seen." And Darius's world, the court, the power center, should look too clean. Too symmetrical. Like the environment itself has been trained not to show mess. If the cinematography team understands that, they can make the entire moral argument of the show without a single speech. Power looks polished. Survival looks improvised. And Jane looks like the collision point between the two. And can we talk about the con for a second? Because I actually think it's a smart choice. A lot of dramas would pick a sword, a seal, some glowing artifact. But a hair ornament is intimate. It's close to the head, close to identity, close to the body. Stealing it isn't just theft, it's violation, it's humiliation, it's "I got close enough to take something you thought was untouchable." Which is exactly why the punishment escalates so quickly. It's not about value. It's about the audacity of the powerless. Now, the drowning sentence. This is the moment the show wants you to remember, and it's also where the sound design can absolutely ruin you if it's done right. Drowning isn't a clean execution like a blade drop. It's slow panic. It's water filling places water shouldn't be. It's the body begging for air while the world acts like it's doing paperwork. If the show plays it with too much music, it becomes melodrama. If it strips the score back, lets you hear water, cloth shifting, a gasp cut short, footsteps that don't hurry, then it becomes something colder, institutional cruelty. The best version of that scene, in my head, is shot with distance at first. Let the courtroom energy be formal, like everyone's pretending this is normal. Let Darius be still, elevated, framed like a statue. And then tighten in on Jane, not with flashy angles, but with humiliating proximity. The way she would stand there blind, trying to orient herself by sound, probably hearing the judgment before she can even locate where it's coming from. That's the brutality. She can't even look at the man who's doing it. She has to listen to him. And the twins, oh, the twins, being labeled thieves in that moment is what turns this from tragedy into a moral test. Because if they are old enough to act, they are old enough to feel guilt, and if they are young enough to be desperate, they are young enough to be punished unfairly. That's a tightrope the writing has to walk. Make them competent, but not conveniently adult. Make them brave, but not superhuman. If the show nails that balance, you're not just watching kids in danger. You're watching innocence getting shaped into something harder. I'm going to give a respectful contrarian take here, because I can already hear the complaint some viewers will have: this is too cruel. Why would Darius be so unforgivable? And I get it. But I actually think the cruelty is the point, because it's not personal cruelty yet. It's structural. He doesn't need to hate Jane to destroy her. He just needs to be committed to the idea that punishment equals order. That's a more frightening villainy than jealousy or revenge, and it sets up the only redemption arc I would accept, not, he softens because love, but, he changes because he finally sees what his system does. And yes, I know, that's me asking a melodrama fantasy to behave like a character study. That's my toxic trait as a viewer. I can't help it. What hit me surprisingly hard, like, I felt it in my chest, was the idea of Jane raising those twins while blind. Because it reframes motherhood as listening. A lot of parenting on screen is visual shorthand. The mom sees the danger, sees the child running, sees the bruise. Jane would have to parent by sound, touch, intuition, and fear. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every bump in the night is a potential threat. That's not just disability representation, that's constant hypervigilance. And if you've ever lived in a place where you had to stay quiet to stay safe, that part doesn't feel like fantasy. The show's title, Anak Kembar Rahasia Binatang, is also doing a lot of work. Secret twins of the Beast King, okay, that's the hook. But the secret isn't just a plot device, it's a commentary on legitimacy. Who gets to be recognized as family? Who gets named, claimed, protected? And who gets erased because their existence complicates a powerful man's story? The twins' entire identity is an argument against the official narrative. And here's another little craft thing I appreciated, the timeline gap of 7 years. That's long enough that Jane's wounds can be scars rather than fresh bandages, long enough for the twins to have personalities and agency, and long enough for Darius to have settled into whatever version of himself he is now. It also makes the abandonment louder. You don't forget someone you left in an abyss. You decide what they mean to you. That's what the story is accusing him of. If the editing is sharp, the show can make that 7-year absence feel like a haunting instead of exposition. Quick flashes, sensory echoes, the sound of wind over a drop, the sensation of falling. Not a neat recap. More like PTSD intruding. Jane doesn't have to say, "I remember," for us to feel that she's still there. But let's be honest, with a premise this operatic, the line between emotionally heightened and soap opera chaos is thin. And I do think the show risks tipping over when it leans too hard on coincidence-style cruelty. Like, the idea that the twins steal specifically Darius's cond, and that leads directly to Jane being sentenced to drown by the same man she fell for, without recognition. This is fate with a capital F. It's dramatic, it's brutal, it's also extremely engineered. The reason I'm not mad at it is because the story isn't pretending it's subtle. It's aiming for mythic irony. It wants you to scream at the screen. It wants you to feel powerless the way Jane feels powerless. And sometimes, honestly, I like when a drama is confident enough to go big without apologizing for it. The music, if it's smart, should also avoid apologizing. Give Jane a motif that isn't sad violin, please. Give her something steadier, like a low, persistent note that feels like endurance rather than despair. Give Darius something that sounds official, almost ceremonial, like power dressed up as destiny. And give the twins something that flickers, restless, clever, dangerous in a way that isn't evil, just untamed. Because the half-dragon element shouldn't just be CGI spectacle. It should be metaphor. Dragon blood as inherited otherness. Dragon blood as rage they have to manage. Dragon blood as the thing that makes them valuable to the world only when the world wants to use them. If the show understands that, every time the twins' nature threatens to surface, it becomes a question: you allowed to be yourself in a society that only tolerates you when you're obedient? And can we circle back to Darius not knowing Jane is their mother? That ignorance is not neutral. It's not just, oops. It's a consequence of him not looking. Not listening. Not investigating. He rules like someone who expects the world to be filtered before it reaches him, and so he makes life and death decisions without contact with the human cost. There's a version of this story where, once he finds out, the drama becomes a grovel fest. And I'm begging for a version where Jane's pain isn't treated like a hurdle for his redemption. I want her anger to be allowed to exist. I want the twins' resentment to be allowed to exist. Forgiveness should be a choice, not a genre requirement. Now, I'm going to say something that might sound petty, but it matters. The name, Jurang Iblis, is so metal that the show has no excuse to make it visually boring. If you call a place Devil's Abyss, it better feel like a place that eats hope. The lighting should feel wrong. The air should feel heavy. The camera should linger just long enough that you start imagining what it smells like: damp stone, blood, old earth. Otherwise, why even name it that? And yeah, I realize I'm the person who will watch a fantasy drama and be like, but what's the texture of the despair? I'm fun at parties. One thing the show does, even in this basic summary, is set up a moral inversion. The king commits the most unethical act, while the thieves are doing it to keep someone alive. That inversion is the heartbeat of a lot of satisfying drama, because it gives you clarity. You know who you're rooting for. But it also sets a trap. If the show stays too cleanly inverted, king bad, mother good, then there's nowhere to go emotionally except escalation. So the question becomes, will the writing complicate Jane, too? Will it show the cost of survival choices? Because raising secret half-dragon twins in hiding isn't just noble, it's isolating. It's lying as a lifestyle. It's making decisions for your kids without their consent. Even if it's necessary, it has consequences. And consequences are where character arcs live. Another rehook for you: what happened when the twins, who stole to save her, grow up and start believing that stealing and fighting is the only language the world understands? Because if the show is brave, it won't keep them pure. It'll let them become complicated, maybe even scary, and it'll make you understand why. Performance-wise, I'm watching for how Darius is played in the judgment moments. The easiest choice is to go icy. The better choice is controlled certainty, someone who thinks he's doing the right thing. There's a specific kind of arrogance in calm sentencing. Not loud cruelty. Calm cruelty. If the actor gives us tiny fractures, an eye twitch when the cond is mentioned, pause that suggests something almost human flickering and then being swallowed by pride, that's the good stuff. That's the difference between a villain and a tragedy. And Jane's actress, again, has to sell two contradictions at once: fragility and steel. Blindness and vigilance. Pain and competence. If she's only suffering, the character becomes a symbol. If she's only strong, the trauma becomes decorative. The sweet spot is when you can see she's exhausted but she still calculates, still protects, still chooses. That's where you start believing she could raise twins alone for 7 years. I also want to give credit, preemptively, cautiously, to the show for letting motherhood be the central power fantasy. Not romance. Not crowns. Not prophecy. My kids live. That's the mission. And in a lot of dramas, that kind of love gets treated as soft. Here, it's the hardest thing in the story. It requires violence sometimes. It requires theft. It requires living with hatred in your throat because you can't afford to scream. The con theft is such a clean catalyst because it forces all the worlds to collide, the hidden family and the public throne. And it's personal enough to be insulting to Darius, which explains why he responds with maximum dominance. Kings don't just punish crimes, they punish challenges to their untouchability. Also, the choice of drowning as punishment is thematically nasty in a way that feels intentional. Jane fell into an abyss for him, falling, depth, darkness. Now she's being sentenced to go under again, but this time by his order. It's like the story is rhyming trauma. That repetition is what makes it feel cursed. Like the universe itself is complicit. I will say, though, there's a thin line between poetic tragedy and trauma treadmill. If every turning point is just Jane getting hurt again, you start to numb out. The show needs breaths. It needs moments of warmth with the twins that aren't immediately punished by the plot. It needs humor that comes from character, not from slapstick, because otherwise the darkness becomes one note. And those warmth moments don't have to be huge. They can be tiny: the twins guiding her hand to something they made, Jane recognizing one child by the rhythm of their footsteps, a whispered joke in hiding that feels like rebellion. The kind of intimacy that makes the later judgment scenes unbearable, because you're not just worried she'll die, you're grieving the life they were barely allowed to have. Here's something else I noticed about the setup: Darius doesn't recognize her. That could be played as convenient. Or it could be played as devastating commentary. If Jane is scarred, blind, changed by survival, then not being recognized becomes a metaphor for what trauma does to identity. You can come back from hell and the world still demands you be the person it remembers, or it refuses to see you at all. If the show leans into that, If it frames Jane not just as hidden, but as socially erased, it's actually pretty sharp. And it also raises a thorny question: if Darius did recognize her, would he even admit it publicly? Because kings don't just have feelings, they have reputations. And reputations are often built on denial. The more I think about it, the more the twins become the moral dynamite. Because they are innocent and they are not. They are children. But they commit a crime. They are saving their mother, but they are violating a king. They are half-dragon, which probably makes them feared, but they are also just kids trying to keep their world from collapsing. That tension is where the best scenes would live, where you can love them and worry about what they are becoming. And yes, I'm aware I'm speaking in a lot of would and should, because I'm not going to sit here and fabricate 10 episodes of plot that I wasn't given. But the premise itself gives us enough to evaluate the craft choices the drama is making, the type of story it wants to be, the emotional promises it's making, and the risks it's taking. One risk is sympathy fatigue. Another risk is making Darius irredeemable and then still trying to sell him as romantic. And a third risk, maybe the biggest, is turning Jane into a saint instead of a person. Saints are boring. People are messy. And this story, with its theft and punishment and secrets, is built for mess. There's also the class angle, which fantasy dramas sometimes accidentally stumble into and then don't know what to do with. The thief label is rarely about the act itself, it's about who gets to be presumed innocent. A rich person misplaces something, a poor person steals. The moment the twins are judged, the show has a chance to say something about power defining morality. And if the courtroom or judgment space is shot with those classic visual hierarchies, Darius elevated, the accused below, guards as a wall, the crowd as a faceless mass, then the mise-en scene becomes the argument. You don't have to preach. You just show the geometry of dominance. Let me give you a mini-scene retelling, staying faithful to what we actually know: the twins, small enough to still be underestimated, close enough to danger that every breath matters, get their hands on this royal cond. Maybe it's hidden, maybe it's guarded, maybe it's on Darius himself at some point. Whatever the exact staging is, the emotional beat is the same. Their fingers close around something that symbolizes the man who has the power to crush them, and for a second it's not even triumph. It's urgency. They are not stealing for thrill. They are stealing like drowning people grab air. Cut to judgment. The space is colder. The air feels controlled. Jane can't see the faces that are deciding her fate, but she can hear them. She can hear the word thief land on the children like a brand. And then Darius's sentence, drowning, drops into the room with that sickening finality. The kind of finality that only comes from someone who has never been told, no. Jane's body goes still, not because she accepts it, but because shock has its own gravity. And the twins, again, we don't need extra plot to understand this. The twins have to realize that the thing they did to save her has now pulled her directly into the king's hands. That's not just drama. That's tragedy logic. The attempt to survive becomes the reason you're punished. If that didn't make your stomach tighten a little, I don't know, maybe you're built different. Now, where I'm mixed, because my stance on this is definitely mixed to intrigued, is that setups like this can sometimes become addicted to cruelty. They keep raising the stakes through suffering instead of through choices. The difference is agency. I want to see Jane and the twins making decisions that shape the story, not just being crushed by it. The con theft is a great start because it's active. But the drowning sentence, if it's just a helpless inevitability, can make the narrative feel like it's punishing its own protagonist for existing. So what I'm hoping the show does, and what I'm watching for in how scenes are framed, is that Jane's inner life remains present. Even blind, even scarred, even cornered, she has strategies. She has instincts. She has love that can turn sharp. And the twins, being half-dragon, should not just be special, they should be volatile in a way that forces moral questions. If they have power, when do they use it? If they are feared, do they lean into that fear as protection? Or do they reject it and risk being crushed? And Darius, because he's the one with institutional power, has to be written with enough dimensionality that his ignorance isn't just a plot coupon. If he's truly unaware Jane is their mother, what does he think happened 7 years ago? Does he believe she died? Did he close that chapter and lock it? The show doesn't have to spoon-feed answers immediately, but it has to create the sense that his choices are connected to a worldview, not just to cruelty. There's also a fascinating identity tension in the Beast King concept. If he is the Raja Binatang, there's a built-in metaphor, the ruler who claims dominion over instinct and wildness, sentencing a mother of half-dragon children to death. It's like he's waging war on the very beast part of life he supposedly commands. That hypocrisy is juicy if the writing knows it's there. Okay, quick self-aware aside before we get too heavy. Every time I say "con" out loud, my brain keeps trying to make it sound like the name of a Pokemon. Cond, I choose you. Not proud of that. Moving on. What I did like, genuinely, about the premise is how it forces emotion and politics into the same room. A theft becomes a legal case. A mother's desperation becomes a public spectacle. Love becomes evidence. And when a story does that, it stops being just romance tragedy and becomes something about systems, how personal pain gets processed by institutions that don't speak the language of mercy. And it's not just Jane being judged, it's the twins being categorized. Thieves is a category. Half-dragon is a category. Secret is a category. Once the world labels you, it starts treating you as predictable. The smartest characters in dramas like this are the ones who learn to weaponize the labels, either by hiding inside them or by shattering them on purpose. So let me throw another question at you. What if the most dangerous thing in the story isn't the dragon blood, but the moment the twins realize the law will never love them? Because that's the moment children stop being children, and the show will either flinch from that darkness, or it'll go there. I also want to touch on how editing rhythm could support the emotional contrast. When Jane is in hiding, you want longer takes, softer cuts, the sense of listening. When the Cond is stolen, you want the pulse to spike, tighter cuts, closer hands, a little bit of chaos without losing geography. And when the judgment happens, slow it down again, but not gently, slow it down like a guillotine descending. Let the viewer sit in the dread. Let the silence become accusation. Silence, by the way, is one of the most underused tools in melodrama. People assume you need constant score to tell you what to feel. But the sound of breath in a courtroom? The slight clink of an ornament being held as evidence? The pause before a sentence is delivered? Those sounds can be louder than music if you let them. And for Jane specifically, sound is literally her world. The show has an opportunity to make us experience scenes through audio emphasis. When someone moves behind her, we should hear it. When a guard shifts weight, it should matter. When the twins speak, their voices should carry comfort and fear at the same time. If the sound design team is thoughtful, they can make the audience feel her vulnerability in a way visuals alone can't. Now, I've been pretty intense, so let me be fair about the potential weaknesses. The half-dragon twins element can absolutely become a crutch if the show uses it as a save the cat shortcut, like, look how special they are, care more. Specialness isn't a personality. What makes characters stick is specificity. One twin is quieter but more calculating, the other is impulsive but emotionally perceptive. Whatever the actual balance is, it needs texture. Otherwise, they turn into a single plot device with two faces. And again, I'm not inventing who they are. I'm saying the show needs to do the work to separate them in behavior and energy, not just in, they are twins. Another thing, Darius sentencing Jane to drown without knowing she's the mother is deliciously tragic, but it also risks making him look incompetent if the world building doesn't support his ignorance. How could he not know? How could no one recognize her? The show has to sell the plausibility through environment and context, her scars, her blindness, her status, the way power forgets the faces of the people it discards. If it sells that, then the ignorance becomes thematic. If it doesn't, it becomes convenient. And yet, I keep coming back to why this premise works emotionally. It's because it's not just secrets and lies. It's about recognition. Jane wants to be recognized not for her sacrifice, but for her existence. The twins want to be recognized not as threats, but as children. And Darius, whether he knows it or not, is being set up to face the consequences of what he refused to recognize 7 years ago. The show's big gamble is that it asks you to sit in injustice for a while. Some viewers hate that. They want immediate catharsis. I'm a little masochistic with my fiction, I admit it. I can handle a slow simmer if I trust the writers are building towards something earned. But if the drama keeps resetting the suffering without changing the characters, that's when I check out. Still, there's a raw power to a story that begins with a woman falling into hell for a man, surviving, and then raising the proof of that love in secret while the man rules above ground like nothing ever happened. That's not just melodrama. That's myth. And the part that's going to define whether Anak Kembar Rahasia Raja Binatang becomes addictive or exhausting is what it does with that myth once the con theft cracks the world open. Does it interrogate power, or does it just use power as scenery? Does it let Jane be angry in a way that's messy, or does it force her into saintly suffering? Does it let the twins' love be complicated by resentment, or does it keep them eternally devoted little angels? Because the drowning sentence is not just a cliff moment. It's a thesis statement: the system will kill the vulnerable without asking who they are. And I want to linger on Darius for a second longer, because it's easy to flatten him, and I don't think the setup benefits from that. Even if you hate him, especially if you hate him, the most satisfying arcs are the ones where the powerful character has to confront the human reality they've been insulated from. If he finds out Jane is the mother and his first response is image management, that's realistic. If his first response is denial, that's realistic. If his first response is guilt so huge it makes him lash out harder, that's also realistic. Realistic doesn't mean sympathetic, by the way. It means textured. Texture is what separates "I watched it" from "I forgot it." And if the show plays with visual symbolism, water as punishment, abyss as sacrifice, hair ornament as identity, then you can get scenes where the object carries meaning without anyone saying it out loud. Imagine the con being held up in judgment while the camera cuts to Jane's scarred face, eyes unfocused, expression tightening as she hears what's being used as evidence. That's cinema. That's not just plot. One more rehook, because I know some of you are thinking, okay, but is it actually entertaining? Here's the thing, entertainment isn't always comfort. Sometimes it's tension so sharp you can't scroll. The con theft into drowning sentence pipeline is engineered to keep you watching because it's emotionally unfair. You want to see the universe corrected. You want the recognition moment. You want the truth to detonate in the room. And the show understands that hunger. It baits you with it. Where I'm going to be watching closely, as the story continues beyond this setup, is whether Jane stays a subject or becomes an object. Subject means she wants, chooses, strategizes, lies, protects, maybe even manipulates when she has to. Object means things happen to her while the men and the system decide what she's worth. The premise is dangerously close to objectifying her suffering, but it also has the ingredients to make her one of those unforgettable survival heroines who doesn't win by being pure, but by being unbreakable in a way that still feels human. And look, I'll be real with you, I have a soft spot for characters who are forced to live after the big sacrifice. A lot of stories treat sacrifice like a heroic endpoint. This one treats it like the beginning of a long, ugly life. That's closer to reality than we like to admit. You don't do one brave thing and get rewarded. Sometimes you do one brave thing and then spend years paying for it. Okay. But I don't want to get lost in philosophy when the drama's main fuel is emotion. So let's talk chemistry, not romantic chemistry, because the present-day dynamic here is more like executioner and abandoned ghost. The most important chemistry is tension chemistry, the electricity in scenes where Darius exerts power and Jane has to stay silent to survive. The air should feel charged. Not because they are longing for each other, but because the history is screaming underneath every word. If the actors are good, you'll feel that history even if they don't touch. A pause that lasts one beat too long. A voice that tightens around a certain phrase. A subtle flinch. Those details are everything in stories built on recognition and misrecognition. And then there's the twins. Their chemistry with each other has to feel lived in. Twins on screen sometimes get written like mirror dialogue machines. But real closeness is messier, interrupting each other, finishing thoughts wrong, disagreeing with a glance, protecting each other without discussion. If the child actors, or young actors, can sell that without it feeling rehearsed, the show gets an emotional anchor that can carry the heavier, darker plot turns. I also appreciate, at least conceptually, that the twins are not stealing to get rich or to rebel for fun. They are stealing to save Jane. That matters because it places love at the center of the moral conflict. Love causes the crime. Love triggers the punishment. Love becomes dangerous. That's tragic, but it's also dramatically clean. Now, some newcomers might be wondering, why not just ask for help? Why not reveal the truth? And the show's answer, implied by the setup, is simple, because power doesn't reward vulnerability. If Jane reveals herself, she's not guaranteed safety, she's guaranteed scrutiny. And if the twins are half-dragon, revealing them is risking their lives. Hiding is not cowardice here, it's strategy. Plus, if Darius is the kind of ruler who orders drowning as punishment for theft, you don't exactly expect him to be gentle with secrets that threaten his legitimacy. A secret family isn't just scandal, it's political instability. Even if he has a heart, he also has a throne. And that tension, heart versus throne, is classic drama meat. The best version doesn't let him pick heart easily. The best version makes him realize that the throne he's protecting is built on bones. I want to zoom in again on Jane's blindness, because it's not just a physical condition in this story, it's narrative positioning. She doesn't have access to information the way other characters do. She can't see who's approaching. She can't read faces. She can't witness the con being displayed. She's always one step behind in a world where knowledge is survival. That's a really effective way to keep tension high, but it also means the writing has to avoid cheap tricks. Don't use her blindness as a constant gotcha. Use it as a lived reality that shapes how she trusts. When she trusts the twins, it's because she knows them by sound, by touch, by presence. When she distrusts the world, it's because the world has taught her that unseen danger is still danger. That's coherent. That's character. And if the show ever allows her a moment of competence that comes from adapting, like hearing something others miss, or sensing a lie through hesitation, that's when disability portrayal becomes empowering without becoming magical. One more small but important thing, the show's emotional credibility depends on letting Jane be more than misery. Give her humor. Give her irritation. Give her moments of tenderness that aren't soaked in tears. Let her be a mother who can be exasperated, not just saintly. The twins stealing the cond is dramatic, but it also implies they've been raised with enough independence to take action. That suggests Jane has been parenting actively, not just clinging. And the more active she is, the more painful the drowning sentence becomes. Because it's not fate crushing a helpless woman. It's society punishing a survivor. I'm not going to wrap anything up here, because we're still sitting inside the pressure cooker this premise sets up, and there's a lot more to unpack about why the show's craft choices either sharpen that knife or dull it. What I'll say is this: if you're stepping into Anak Kembar Rahasia Raja Binatang as a newcomer, don't expect a gentle fantasy. Expect something that wants you tense, a little angry, and weirdly protective of three characters who the world keeps labeling as disposable. And the next thing I want to dig into is how the show uses the secret itself as a form of violence, because keeping a secret doesn't just hide you from enemies, it also keeps you from allies, and that isolation can start to look like its own prison when the walls close in around the twins and their mother, especially once Darius's judgment turns their desperate theft into a public declaration of war against the throne itself, whether they meant it that way or not, because from the king's perspective the moment his cond is taken isn't just a crime, it's a message that someone out there believes he can be reached, touched, and challenged, because from the king's perspective the moment his cond is taken isn't just a crime, it's a message that someone out there believes he can be reached, touched, and challenged, and rulers like that don't handle reachable very well. They need the world to treat them like weather. Unstoppable. Impersonal. I don't care how noble you want Darius to be in your head, the minute the illusion of untouchability cracks, the response is almost always disproportionate. And drowning as a sentence is about as disproportionate as it gets. That's why the secret in this story isn't just a fun hook. It's a weapon pointed at Jane from both ends. Keeping the twins' secret protects them from the state, sure, but it also cuts them off from any claim to legitimacy, any chance of help, any possibility of being seen as anything other than a rumor or a threat. Secrecy becomes this slow violence where you're alive, but you're always living like you're already guilty. And there's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with raising children inside a secret. You don't get community. You don't get casual friendships. You don't get to say, "My kids are struggling," without translating everything into safer words. So when the twins steal the con to save Jane, I don't read it as kids being reckless. I read it as the inevitable moment secrecy collapses under pressure. A secret is stable until someone gets sick, or hungry, or desperate, and then suddenly all that careful hiding turns into a sprint. If you're new to this drama and thinking, okay, but this is fantasy, half-dragon twins, Beast King, surely it's going to be campy, I'm telling you right now, the bones of it are not camp. The premise is basically a moral blender. It takes love, sacrifice, law, and identity, and it hits puree until everything is unrecognizable. The fantasy elements are the sugar around a very bitter pill. Here's a rehook that kept me watching mentally even when I wanted to look away. What if the cruelest part isn't that Darius doesn't know Jane is the mother? What if the cruelest part is that he doesn't even consider she might be someone worth knowing? Because ignorance isn't always accidental. Sometimes it's chosen. Sometimes it's cultivated. Power trains you to stop asking questions. This is where acting choices can quietly save the whole story. Because if Darius is played like an unfeeling execution machine, then the drama becomes a straight line. He's bad, Jane is good, the world is unfair. That can be satisfying for an episode or two, but it gets flat. If he's played with that awful, believable moral confidence, like he's not punishing out of spite, he's punishing out of principle, then you get something more chilling. You get a man who would call himself righteous while doing monstrous things. And that's the kind of character you can actually build tension with, because he won't change unless the story forces him to confront himself. I know some people hate that, by the way. They want clear villains. They want a hissable antagonist they can enjoy hating. I'm not judging that. Sometimes I want that too, especially after a long week. But Anak Kembar Rahasia Binatang is set up for a different kind of frustration, the kind where you're yelling, "Just look at her. Just listen," and the person in power keeps refusing, not because he's blind, but because seeing would require accountability. Jane, meanwhile, is the emotional center, and the drama has to treat her like a living, breathing person, not a pain dispenser. The blind, scarred, abandoned trifecta is already heavy. If the writing has any sense, it'll use her blindness not as tragedy garnish but as a way to shift perspective. Jane experiences the world as threat detection. Sound becomes information. Silence becomes a danger sign. Touch becomes memory. And when she's being judged, she can't read expressions, she can only hear the tone of people deciding whether she deserves to live. That alone is enough to make the judgment scenes feel like horror, if the direction is smart. You can frame the court as this cavern of echoes where every whisper becomes a verdict. You can make Darius's voice feel like it's coming from somewhere too high to reach. And you can keep Jane in the center of the frame while she's surrounded by people she can't see. That's not just aesthetic, that's empathy engineering. It puts the viewer into her vulnerability without needing a monologue. And the twins, these kids are such a loaded device, because they're both plot catalysts and emotional anchors. Half-dragon is the kind of thing that can go cheap fast if it's treated like a power-up. But if it's treated like stigma, it becomes instantly more grounded. In a lot of fantasy worlds, being part something is either romanticized or fetishized. Here, the title alone suggests danger, secret twins of the Beast King. Secret means hunted. Secret means denied. Secret means the story itself is admitting that society can't handle them as they are. There's also this delicious irony that Darius is the Beast King, but the children are the ones with dragon blood. So who's the monster in the room? The ones born different, or the one who enforces a law that kills without understanding? The show has the chance to flip that question over and over until you start realizing, Beast isn't about species, it's about behavior. Let me throw another rehook at you, because this is the knot I can't stop pulling at. When the twins stole the con to save Jane, did they know they were poking a bear, or did they genuinely believe the world might still be reasonable? That distinction matters. If they thought the world could be fair, then the punishment is a loss of innocence. If they knew the world was cruel and did it anyway, then the punishment is the confirmation of something they already feared. Either way, the aftermath changes them. Now, pacing-wise, a premise like this is basically a slingshot. You pull back with the 7 years ago trauma, then you let go with the con theft and the drowning sentence. The danger is what comes after the slingshot. Some dramas can't sustain the velocity. They either keep escalating until it's absurd, or they stall in repetitive suffering. The only sustainable path is escalation through character decisions, not just bigger punishments. And yes, I'm speaking in principles again because I'm not going to invent scenes. But I can tell you what kinds of scenes this premise sets up as necessary if the story wants to earn its emotional weight. Jane needs moments where her love for the twins isn't just protective, it's conflicted. She might fear what their dragon side could become. She might fear that her secrecy is hurting them. She might fear that her own past with Darius is a shadow they'll inherit. Those are human fears, and they're the kind of texture that prevents the narrative from turning her into a martyr statue. Darius needs moments where his authority is challenged in ways he can't punish away. Not necessarily rebellion, sometimes the strongest challenge is simply being confronted with consequences. Like realizing that thief isn't a personality type, it's a label applied to desperate people. Or realizing that drowning as punishment doesn't restore order, it creates terror. If he's ever forced to sit with that, not in a melodramatic, single-tier way, but in a my worldview just cracked way, then the show can start to explore whether power can change, or whether it only adapts to protect itself. And the twins need moments where their identity becomes a choice. Not choose to be dragon or human, like a video game toggle. I mean, do they embrace the fear people project onto them as armor? Do they keep trying to be good in a system that punishes them anyway? Do they resent Jane for keeping them hidden? Do they resent Darius for existing as the invisible reason they are hunted? Kids can feel all of that at once. Kids are contradictions. That's why writing them well is hard. There's a small but important detail in the summary that I keep coming back to. The twins steal the con to save Jane. That implies Jane is in danger before the theft. She needs saving. Whether it's illness, injury, threat of capture, whatever the exact trigger is, it tells us Jane's survival has always been precarious. She's not hiding in comfort. She's hiding on the edge. And the edge is where people make choices that the law calls crimes and the heart calls necessary. If the drama uses that to explore morality, it can get genuinely compelling. The best melodramas are moral pressure cookers. They force you to ask, what would I do, not in abstract, but in the ugliest, most immediate terms. Would you steal from a king to keep your mother alive? Would you accept being called a thief to protect your sibling? Would you beg the system for mercy knowing it might crush you anyway? Here's my personal confession moment, and it's a little embarrassing. I have a very specific emotional reaction to stories where a sacrifice is forgotten. Like, not just unappreciated, but erased. The idea that Jane fell into the Jurang Iblis for Darius and then got abandoned, it hits some ancient nerve in me about doing the most for people who do the least back. And I know that's not uniquely me, so many of us have had some version of that, even if it's not literally a devil abyss. So when the story then has Darius sentence her to drown, it's like the universe saying, not only did your sacrifice not matter, it has become evidence against you. That's the kind of injustice that makes you feel heat behind your eyes. And speaking of heat, let's talk about the emotional temperature of the visuals, because fantasy dramas live or die by tone. Jane's world should feel tactile and warm in the sense of human closeness, even if it's dangerous. The king's world should feel cold and polished. If the show makes the palace too cozy, it blurs the moral contrast. If it makes the hiding place too aesthetic, it romanticizes poverty. I want grime. I want fabric that looks worn. I want candlelight that flickers like it's afraid to be seen. The con itself, visually, is an opportunity for symbolic filmmaking. A hair ornament can catch light in a way a sword can't. It's delicate. It's personal. In a well-shot scene, the con could glint like temptation, like fate, like a tiny piece of the king's identity made portable. When the twins take it, it's not just a theft, it's them holding a fragment of power in their hands. You can do a close-up of small fingers gripping something ornate, and the whole theme of the powerless touching the powerful lands without words. Sound design can also carry symbolism here. The con might have a faint chime when it moves, a soft metallic whisper that becomes a sonic trigger. Imagine that sound echoing in the judgment hall. Imagine Jane hearing it and not knowing what it is, only that the room reacts. Imagine the twins hearing it and feeling guilt spike. Little motifs like that turn objects into emotional landmines. Now, I want to address something that a lot of fans of this kind of drama argue about. Is it realistic that Darius doesn't recognize Jane? In strict logic terms, maybe it depends. But emotionally, it makes sense if the show frames it as the cost of trauma and time. 7 years is a long time. Jane is scarred. She's blind. She's been living in hiding. She's not dressed like someone who belongs in his world. And more importantly, he may not be looking for her. People recognize what they expect to see. If he expects her to be dead, then he will see a stranger. If he expects her to be a myth, then he will see a problem, not a person. That's what makes misrecognition such a powerful device. It's not just a plot trick, it's a statement about perception. The powerful often don't recognize the people they've harmed because recognizing them would require admitting harm. And that's where the drama has a chance to be smarter than it looks. Because it can use fantasy to talk about something painfully mundane, how institutions treat individuals. Jane isn't a woman in front of Darius, she's the accused. The twins aren't kids, they're thieves. Once you become a category, your story stops mattering to the system. The system doesn't care why you stole, it cares that you stole from the symbol of itself. Rehook time, because this is the turn that matters. What if the reveal of Jane's identity, whenever and however it happens, doesn't automatically save her? What if it makes things worse, because now the crime isn't just theft, it's lineage. Now it's legitimacy. Now it's scandal. Now it's the throne's stability. That's when the story stops being a simple morality tale and becomes a war over narrative. And that's also why I'm cautious about romance framing. If the show tries to pivot into, Darius loves her again, without confronting what he did, abandonment, then sentencing, then it's not just unsatisfying, it's insulting. Because it tells the audience Jane's pain exists to decorate his character development. I don't need him to be forever unforgivable, I need the story to understand that forgiveness is not an entitlement. Jane's arc should not be, endure until he recognizes you. Jane's arc should be, survive until you recognize yourself as worthy of more than endurance. That's the difference between a melodrama that uses suffering and one that interrogates it. Now, let's dig into the twins as mirrors, because twins in drama are almost always used as duality. One represents caution, one represents impulse, one is heart, one is mind. It's a trope, yes, but tropes aren't bad, they are tools. The question is whether the show uses the tool to carve something specific. If the twins are half dragon, maybe their dragon nature manifests differently emotionally rather than physically. One twin might externalize anger, the other might internalize it. One might crave revenge, the other might crave belonging. Those contrasts would make their bond more interesting than two cute kids doing the same thing. Again, I'm not claiming that's exactly what happens. I'm describing the kind of writing choice that would make the premise pay off. Because the story needs more than, they are special. It needs, they are specific. And because this is Bongo Gaming and I'm me, I have to point out the funniest unintentional thing about the premise. Imagine being a royal guard whose entire job is, protect the king's hair ornament, and then you have to report that it got stolen by 2 children. Like, sir, your career, your dignity, your life expectancy, gone. I'm not laughing at the kids, I'm laughing at the system that makes a decorative object worth more than human life. That's also a theme, by the way. Objects as power. People as disposable. Okay, let's talk about the emotional architecture of the drowning sentence, because that's the big spike. The scene isn't just frightening because Jane might die. It's frightening because it's an echo. She fell into the Jurang Iblis for Darius, now she's being forced under by his law. The story is repeating the trauma in a new form. That's how PTSD feels, the past finds new costumes. And the show can convey that with editing, flash impressions of darkness, water sounds bleeding into present-day audio, the feeling of falling returning. If the show chooses to do a parallel montage, again, not inventing specifics, just talking craft, it could cut between the abyss fall and the drowning preparation, the rush of air, the muffled sound, the body's helplessness. That would be devastating if done with restraint. And if done with too much melodramatic scoring, it'll be exhausting. Restraint is the difference between "I'm crying" and "I'm rolling my eyes." One thing I'll praise in advance, because the premise deserves it, is the sheer commitment to consequences. A lot of dramas let the powerful character do something cruel early on and then hand-wave it away later with misunderstanding. Here, the cruelty is the point. It's not an accident. It's a judgment. It's the kind of act that should leave a stain. If the show keeps that stain visible, if it doesn't let anyone forget the drowning sentence happened, then it's doing something right. Now, since the audience control wasn't specified, I'm speaking to newcomers as well as people who already love this genre. If you're a newcomer, here's what to pay attention to that will tell you quickly whether the drama is going to be worth your time. Listen to how characters talk about thieves. Do they say it like it's a fact, or like it's a moral verdict? Watch how the camera frames Jane when she's being judged. Is she centered as a person, or shot like an object? Watch whether the twins are allowed to be scared, or only allowed to be brave. Those are the little tells. Now I want to pivot to the theme of motherhood as rebellion, because that's what Jane is doing. Raising the twins is not just parenting, it's defying erasure. It's saying, you tried to throw me into the abyss and forget me, but I lived, and I made life, and I will not let you erase it. That's powerful, and it's why the story works even if you strip away dragons and kings. It's about a woman insisting on existence. But motherhood in hiding is also controlling. It has to be. Jane's love may sometimes look like restriction. Don't go there. Don't say that. Don't show who you are. And kids raised under that kind of love can grow up resenting it even while understanding it. That's where the drama can get emotionally rich, love that protects and suffocates at the same time. Rehook, are the twins going to blame Jane for the life they had to live, or are they going to blame Darius for forcing them into it? Because whichever direction the story leans, it changes the entire emotional center. And the most honest answer is, they might blame both. That's another reason I'm hoping the show doesn't rush into easy reunions. If Darius ever learns the truth, the first thing the drama should give us isn't romance, it's reckoning. The twins would have every right to hate him. Jane would have every right to reject him. And Darius, if he has any depth, would have to face the fact that his law almost killed his own blood without him even caring to ask. And listen, I know the title kind of invites a secret heirs fantasy where the king eventually claims them. But claiming isn't automatically love. Claiming can be ownership. Claiming can be political. Claiming can be another way to erase Jane, take the children into the palace, sanitize the story, rewrite the past, reduce Jane to an inconvenient chapter. If the show is brave, it will treat Jane's motherhood as non-transferable. She's not a vessel that can be discarded once the kids are recognized. She is the parent. The years matter. The scars matter. The blindness matters. The survival matters. You don't get to show up at year 7 and call yourself the center of the story. Now, can the show still deliver the juicy melodrama people come for? Absolutely. In fact, the melodrama is better when it's grounded. A confrontation doesn't need 10 slaps and a slow-motion feint. It needs one line spoken with the right mixture of disbelief and fury. One breath. One pause. And that's where performance details are going to carry. Jane's actress should play pain like it's layered, like she's not always actively crying, but the hurt is stored in the body. The way she holds herself. The way she doesn't fully relax even in quiet moments. The way she might flinch at certain tones because her brain has catalogued danger sounds. Meanwhile, Darius's actor needs to make power feel like habit. Power should look effortless on him. That's how you know he's dangerous. If he looks like he's trying to be powerful, he's just a bully. If he looks like he's never considered not being obeyed, that's a king. The twins, too, need to show the cost of stress. Kids under threat don't act like normal kids. They grow up fast in some ways and stay childish in others. They can be startlingly competent in survival tasks and then suddenly melt down over something small because their nervous system is overloaded. If the drama captures that, it'll feel painfully real under the fantasy. Let's talk about the show's moral positioning again, because it's doing something sneaky. It makes you root for law-breaking. That's always interesting, because it tests viewers' own relationship to order. Some people watch and go, stealing is wrong, period. Others go, stealing to save a life is morally justified. The show sets up a conflict where the law is clearly unjust in its punishment, which nudges most viewers towards sympathy for the thieves. But it also risks oversimplifying if it doesn't show the social function of law beyond cruelty. What I'd love is if the drama shows us how ordinary people react. Not just guards and royals, but the bystanders in the system. Do they cheer the punishment because they believe it keeps them safe? Do they feel uncomfortable but stay silent because fear is contagious? That's where a show can say something sharp without preaching. But even if it doesn't go that deep, the emotional core remains. Jane is being punished by the man she sacrificed for. That's the hook. That's the wound. That's the reason this premise sticks. Okay, quick humor aside because we need to breathe, I'm imagining the drama's internal logic where the con has the same security level as a nuclear launch code. Like, congratulations kids, you stole a hair ornament and now the state is like, execution. Sir? Please. Maybe chill. But of course, that absurdity is exactly how symbolic power works. You don't punish the act, you punish the disrespect. Now I want to linger on the idea of drowning specifically, because it's a uniquely intimate form of killing. It forces the body into panic. It's not clean. It's not distant. It's not the kind of punishment you can pretend is merciful. And that says something about Darius's kingdom. Either it's so committed to spectacle that it doesn't care about cruelty, or it's so committed to deterrence that it believes terror is governance. Either way, it paints his rule as fear-based. And fear-based rule always creates monsters, if not in the ruler, then in the people who have to survive under it. Rehook, what happens when the twins, who are already part dragon, learn that the human world will kill their mother with cold formality? Because that's the kind of lesson that makes a monster out of someone who just wanted a family. And yes, I'm harping on the twins' future potential because that's the most dramatic possibility embedded in this premise. The story could go a lot of directions, but the cleanest thematic arc is, injustice creates the very threat it claims to stop. Label kids as thieves and monsters, and eventually they might decide to live up to it because there's no reward for being good. If the drama leans into that, it becomes more than tragedy. It becomes a warning. Now, I also want to be fair to viewers who prefer a faster, more cathartic style. This premise is heavy. If the show spends too long in suffering without giving you small victories, small moments of agency, it will feel punishing to watch. And there's a difference between, the story is dark, and, the story is punishing the audience. Dark stories still need oxygen. Oxygen can be tenderness, humor, cleverness, even a moment of petty satisfaction, like the twins outsmarting a guard, or Jane holding her ground verbally in a way that makes someone in power blink. Those moments don't erase the darkness, they make it bearable. They also build investment, because you start wanting the characters to win, not just wanting the villains to lose. In terms of cinematography, I'm hoping the show uses framing to show Jane's disorientation. A slightly off-center composition, shallow focus that isolates her in a crowd, sound-forward scenes where her face is in frame but the world is a blur. And then, when we're with the twins, the camera could become more kinetic, lower angles, moving with their small bodies through spaces designed for adults, making the world feel bigger and more dangerous. The contrast between adult spaces and child bodies is such an easy way to visually communicate vulnerability. A courtroom is intimidating even for an adult. For kids, it's monstrous. And if the show gets that right, if it shoots the hall like a canyon and the twins like small figures swallowed by architecture, then you don't even need dialogue to feel the imbalance. Costume design matters too. Jane's clothing should look functional, not pretty. The twins' clothes should show wear. Darius's wardrobe should scream authority, structured lines, rich textures, clean silhouettes. When you put those characters in the same frame, the visual class divide becomes immediate. And that divide is part of the moral argument: who gets softness, who gets armor. Now, one more contrarian thought, because I can't resist. Sometimes viewers demand that Jane be written as constantly defiant, constantly outspoken, constantly girl boss. And I actually think that could ruin her. A woman in hiding raising secret children under a violent regime would not always be able to be loud. Silence is a survival skill. Caution is intelligence. If Jane is quiet in front of power, that isn't weakness, it's strategy. The drama should allow her to be careful without treating her as passive. The strength can be quieter, she keeps them alive. She navigates blindness in a hostile world. She teaches her children restraint even when they are furious. That's real strength. Not everyone survives by shouting. But the story also needs moments where that quiet strength turns into something sharp. Not constant, not performative. Just one moment where she makes a choice that surprises you, where she refuses to be handled. That's when the audience leans in and goes, oh. She's not just surviving. She's fighting. Rehook, and what if the fight doesn't look like swords or fire, but like refusing to accept the label, thief? Refusing to accept the sentence. Refusing to accept that Darius's ignorance makes his judgment valid. Because the show is about judgment. Not just legal judgment, but moral judgment. Who decides what a person is worth? Who decides what a mother deserves? Who decides whether children are threats or simply children? Now, let's go back to the Devil's Abyss for a second, because it's such a strong metaphor. Jane fell into hell for Darius. That kind of sacrifice is mythic, like Orpheus, like all those stories where love makes you descend. But those myths usually end with either heroic reunion or tragic failure. This story twists it: she descends, survives, and then gets abandoned. It's like the myth doesn't even grant her the dignity of a clean tragedy. It gives her the mess of real life. And that mess is where the drama can actually say something about how society treats women's sacrifices. We celebrate them when they are useful, then we forget them when they are inconvenient. We romanticize devotion, then we punish the devoted when devotion leaves scars. Jane is living proof that sacrifice isn't a virtue if the world doesn't honor it. That's heavy, but it's also why the premise feels like it has teeth. If the show uses flashbacks, I hope it does it sparingly. Not because flashbacks are bad, but because this kind of trauma story can become stuck in the past. The past should intrude like a symptom, not like a lecture. Quick sensory fragments. Not long explanations. Jane's scars are already exposition. And Darius's memory, if we ever see it, should be unreliable. Because people in power often rewrite their own past to avoid guilt. He might remember Jane's fall as heroic and noble and clean. Jane remembers it as terror and pain and abandonment. Both can be true in different ways. That's what makes memory a battlefield. Another thing I want to credit the premise for is the way it frames the children as the consequence of love rather than just a plot twist. The twins aren't an oops. They are the living continuation of a relationship that Darius abandoned. They are the future that Jane carried alone. And that makes every scene involving them political. You can't separate family from power here. The king's bloodline is literally walking around outside his control. That's terrifying to a regime. And it's also why the punishment is so severe. The state doesn't just punish theft, it punishes destabilization. The con theft is a destabilizing act because it signals that the king's body and identity are not protected. Rehook, what if the con wasn't even the most valuable thing the twins could have taken, but it was the most symbolic, And symbolism is what empires are built on. That's why I keep saying the object choice is smart. It's intimate. It's humiliating. It's a crack in the image. Now, because this is a YouTube review script and I'm imagining myself on camera, let me be blunt, I get tired of dramas that think suffering automatically equals depth. Suffering is just suffering. Depth is how the story engages with it. Does it let the character change? Does it let them be contradictory? Does it let them be angry without being punished for anger? Jane deserves anger. The twins deserve anger. And if the show tries to punish them for being angry, if it frames anger as ugliness rather than as a rational response to injustice, then it's telling on itself. Anger can be destructive, sure, but it can also be the first proof that someone still believes they deserve better. So I'm watching for that. How does the show treat Jane's emotions? Does it aestheticize her tears? Does it give her interiority? Does it let her be furious in a way that isn't hysterical? The difference is huge. And the twins, does it let them have mixed feelings about their mother? Because kids can love their parent and still resent the circumstances that parent created, even if those circumstances were forced. That's honest. That's complicated. That's good drama. In terms of editing rhythm, I'm also hoping the show doesn't overcut emotional scenes. Let the actors breathe. If Jane is listening in terror, hold on her face. Let us see the calculation. If Darius is delivering judgment, let the camera sit long enough that we feel the weight of his certainty. Over-editing can make everything feel like a montage, and you lose the dread. Music-wise, I said earlier I want motifs that aren't cliché. And especially for the twins, I want something that feels both wondrous and dangerous. Not cute child theme. Something that suggests they are not safe in this world, and the world is not safe from them either, depending on what they become. Now, I'm going to talk about the mixed side of my stance a bit more, because I don't want to sound like I'm just praising potential. The premise is strong, but it is also extremely high risk for emotional manipulation. The show could easily become one of those suffer porn stories where the audience is dragged from one cruelty to the next. The drowning sentence is already a huge cruelty spike. If the writers keep topping themselves with worse and worse punishments, it stops being dramatic and starts being numbing. The way to avoid numbness is to vary the kind of tension. Sometimes tension is physical danger. Sometimes it's moral dilemma. Sometimes it's relational rupture. Sometimes it's quiet dread. If every episode beat is Jane is hurt again, then the show becomes repetitive. But if the beats shift, if sometimes the danger is secrecy, sometimes it's the twins' identity, sometimes it's Darius's system tightening, then it stays alive. Rehook, and the biggest tension shift the story can offer, without inventing new plot, is the moment Darius's ignorance becomes knowledge. Not because knowledge fixes anything, but because knowledge forces choices. That's the crux. Once he knows, what does he do? And more importantly, what does Jane do with his knowing? Because she has agency too. She can choose to reveal, choose to deny, choose to run, choose to fight. The story needs to let her make choices that don't revolve around his feelings. And for newcomers who might be worried about fantasy jargon, you don't need to know dragon lore to get this story. The dragon part is metaphor plus stakes. The real story is, a woman was abandoned after sacrificing herself, and now the system that abandoned her is about to kill her while her children are caught in the machinery. That's it. That's the emotional spine. I want to zoom out and talk about theme, identity. Jane's identity has been stripped down. She's blind. She's scarred. She's hidden. She's no one to the world. The twins' identity is also unstable. They are children, but they're half-dragon, which likely makes them othered. Darius's identity is king, which means he's not allowed to be wrong. So everyone is trapped by what they are allowed to be. Good dramas are about people pushing against those boxes. Jane pushing against victim. The twins pushing against monster. Darius pushing against infallible. The question is whether the show is interested in that push, or whether it's content to keep everyone in their boxes for the sake of easy conflict. If it's interested, then you get growth. If it's not, you get repetition. And I'll admit, I'm suspicious. Because many dramas love the aesthetics of trauma more than the consequences. They show scars but don't explore what scars do to relationships. They show punishment but don't explore how punishment changes the punished. This story has the opportunity to explore those consequences deeply, especially through the twins. Because the twins are the future. Jane's trauma is the past, Darius's power is the present, and the twins are what happens next. That's why they matter so much. They are not just secret heirs. They are a moral forecast. We hook, so the question isn't just, will Jane survive? It's, what kind of people will the twins become because of what the king's law did to their mother? And that's a harsher question. It's also more interesting. If the show ever gets too indulgent with palace spectacle, golden halls, fancy outfits, dramatic entrances, I want it to remember Jane can't see any of it. That's a storytelling gift. You can contrast the audience's visual experience with Jane's audio experience. The palace might look gorgeous, but Jane experiences it as footsteps, echoes, authority in voices, the coldness of air conditioned by wealth. That's a perspective shift that can make even pretty scenes feel threatening. Also, the show can use Jane's blindness to critique voyeurism. We, the audience, watching her be judged. She can't even see the faces enjoying it. That's a brutal mirror for us. Are we consuming her suffering as entertainment? The drama could lean into that discomfort, even subtly, by holding shots longer than comfortable, by letting the audience feel implicated. Now, let's talk about Darius again, because I can feel some of you wanting me to pick a side. Is he redeemable? At this point, with the given setup, I'm not interested in redeemable as a label. I'm interested in whether the story treats accountability as real. If he changes, it can't be because he suddenly gets feelings. It has to be because he recognizes harm and chooses to act differently even when it costs him power. Anything less is just PR. And if the story wants to be really bold, it could make the redemption not about him being forgiven, but about him being confronted. Sometimes the most satisfying arc isn't, he becomes good, it's, he becomes aware, and awareness is painful. Awareness can be punishment. And that's more interesting than a love story patch. Jane, for her part, should not be written as someone who's waiting for him to be worthy. She's already worthy. She's been worthy. The whole premise is that she was worthy and still got abandoned. So her arc should be about reclaiming selfhood, not about earning recognition. Okay, quick aside, the name, Raja Binatang, always makes me imagine the throne room having animal motifs everywhere, like the architecture itself is snarling. If the production design leans into that, claw shapes, fangs in patterns, heavy textures, it could reinforce the theme of civilized cruelty. A king of beasts dressed in civilization. Now, I want to drill down into the moral mechanics of the judgment scene again, because it's the narrative hinge. The twins are judged as thieves. Jane is sentenced to drown. Darius doesn't know she's their mother. That's the perfect storm, law plus ignorance plus power. But what makes it truly nasty is that the twins' act was motivated by saving Jane. So the law is punishing love. That's a strong thematic move. It tells us that in this world, love is not safe. Love is incriminating. Love makes you act. An action makes you visible. Visibility gets you killed. That's the cycle. Rehook, can the twins learn to love without making themselves targets, or is the world going to teach them that love is weakness? Because that lesson is how you create villains. And if you're watching this as a fan of fantasy melodrama, you know how often kids in these stories grow up into either saviors or tyrants. This premise could go either way, and that's why it's compelling. Now, for the craft nerds, yes, I see you, even though this isn't an academic essay, let's talk about how dialogue can either sharpen or soften the story. The worst version of this drama would have characters announcing themes. Injustice. Sacrifice. Fate. Please no. The better version lets themes live in subtext and behavior. For example, you don't need Jane to say, "I was abandoned." You show it in how she refuses to trust. You show it in how she teaches the twins to rely on each other, not on strangers. You show it in how she flinches when someone offers help because help has always come with a cost. You don't need Darius to say, "I am the law." You show it in how he doesn't ask questions. You show it in how he assumes his judgment is truth. You show it in how he treats the con theft as an affront to identity, not just property. And you don't need the twins to say, "We are half-dragon." You show it in how people react to them, in how they hide, in how they struggle with impulses, in how they feel the world tightening around them when fear of otherness is in the air. That's good storytelling. That's not just plot. Now, I'm aware I've been talking like the show is already perfect, and it's not. The premise is strong, but execution matters. If the editing is sloppy, if the acting is broad, if the writing leans on cliches, it will become a noisy soap opera. That might still be entertaining for some people, and that's valid. But the reason I'm invested is because the premise has the potential for something sharper, a melodrama that actually understands why its own cruelty hurts. And cruelty in storytelling should never be lazy. If you're going to put a character through hell, you better have something to say about hell. Rehook, so here's the real test. Does the drama use Jane's suffering to make you admire her, or does it use it to make you question the world that needs her to suffer? Because admiration alone can be shallow. Questioning can be transformative. Let's talk about the twins stealing as an act of agency again, because it's one of the few concrete actions we're given, and it matters. They are not waiting for rescue. They are creating it. That suggests they've been raised with urgency and resourcefulness. It also suggests they might be willing to break rules if rules are killing their family. That's a moral seed that can grow into either heroism or ruthlessness. And that seed is planted by Jane's circumstances. She didn't choose to raise criminals, she chose to raise survivors. The world decides to call survival crime. The twins being judged as thieves is also a powerful way to show how quickly children get adult punishments when society is afraid. That's real. Not the dragon part, obviously, but the mechanism. Once you're labeled a threat, childhood stops protecting you. That's why the scene has to be played with gravity, not with melodramatic exaggeration. Let the horror be in the normality. If the court treats it like business, it becomes terrifying. If the court treats it like spectacle, it becomes enraging. Both are valid emotional targets, but they are different flavors. And the show needs to choose. Now, I'm going to indulge in one more cinematic imagining, still staying within the premise. Picture Jane hearing the sound of water being prepared. Maybe it's a basin, maybe it's a larger body, maybe it's the sound of chains near water. Whatever the staging is, the sound is what matters for her. She might not know the room's layout, but she hears the shift in atmosphere. People get quieter around death. Even cruel people. There's a hush of anticipation. She hears it, and you watch her swallow. Not dramatic sobbing, just a hard swallow, because her throat is already preparing for something it shouldn't have to. And then the twins, small voices in that hush, maybe trying to speak, maybe being silenced. The detail that kills me is imagining the twins realizing the punishment is aimed at their mother because of what they did. That's guilt. That's instant, crushing guilt. And kids don't have the emotional tools to process it. They either break or they harden. That's the scene's power. It's not just about death. It's about what guilt does to children. Rehook, does the story allow that guilt to change the twins in believable ways, or does it reset them back to cute brave kids, for convenience? Because that choice will tell you whether the writers respect the emotional stakes they created. Now, some viewers will ask, why doesn't Jane just reveal everything right there? And again, revealing isn't safe. Revealing might save her from drowning, or it might get her killed faster. It might get the twins taken. It might get them used. It might get them labeled as monsters publicly. It might ignite political consequences. Secrets are not just personal, they are dangerous currency. And that's why I'm so interested in the secret twins angle, not as gossip, but as power. A secret can protect you, but it can also be leveraged against you. Whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. Darius controls the official narrative right now. Jane has lived in the unofficial one. If the show gets into the battle of narratives, who is Jane, who are the twins, what happened 7 years ago, it can become genuinely gripping, because it's not just fighting with swords, it's fighting with truth. Now, I want to talk about pacing again in a more viewer-feel way. A drama like this should feel like you're holding your breath for long stretches, then suddenly exhaling in short bursts. It shouldn't feel like constant screaming. Constant screaming becomes noise. The tension should be shaped. Quiet, then spike. Quiet, then spike. The theft is a spike. The judgment is a spike. The aftermath needs quiet, quiet dread, quiet planning, quiet emotional fallout, before the next spike. If the show doesn't give you fallout scenes, you lose emotional continuity. The drowning sentence is huge. The characters need to react in ways that linger. Jane needs time to process the betrayal echo. The twins need time to process guilt and fear. Darius, if the story is smart, needs time to show what the sentence cost him psychologically, if anything. Or show the absence of cost, which is its own horror. Rehook, and if Darius feels nothing when he sentences a woman to drown, what does that say about the world that crowned him? What kind of society normalizes that? That's the broader question the show can ask without turning into a lecture. You just show normality. You show people nodding. You show paperwork. You show guards doing their jobs. You show the banality of cruelty. Now, because this is a fantasy drama, there's also the question of how the dragon aspect is visualized. I'm not going to pretend I know the CGI or the lore, but conceptually, the best approach is to keep it tied to emotion. Dragon blood shouldn't activate like a superpower for cool shots. It should flare when the twins are scared, angry, protective. It should feel like something they are learning to control, not something they deploy for fan service. And that ties into the theme of inherited trauma. The twins inherit dragon blood, yes, but they also inherit the consequences of Jane's sacrifice and Darius's abandonment. They inherit a world that fears them. That's trauma inheritance. The dragon element makes it external, but the emotional reality is internal. Now, I'm going to keep going because there's a lot to unpack here and we are nowhere near the point where I'd even allow myself to land the plane. I want to talk about the moral contrast between Jane and Darius in terms of choice. Jane's choices are constrained. Darius's choices are expansive. That imbalance is important, because it shows why power is morally dangerous. When you have options, you are responsible. When you don't, you are surviving. So when the twins steal, they are making a constrained choice. When Darius sentences drowning, he's making an expansive choice. That's why the punishment feels so obscene. The law is being used by someone who could have chosen mercy without personal risk, at least in that moment, but chooses spectacle instead. Rehook, and what if mercy, in this world, is actually the bravest thing a king could do? Not punishment. Mercy. That's a theme fantasy rarely explores well, because it likes battles more than restraint. But restraint can be dramatic too. Especially when everyone expects cruelty. Now, I want to get into the show's emotional manipulation tactics, because every melodrama has them, and it's not automatically a bad thing. Emotional manipulation is kind of the genre's job. The question is whether it's earned. If the drama tries to make you cry by stacking sad music and slow motion without building character intimacy, it's cheap. If it makes you cry because you've seen Jane with her twins in quiet moments and you understand what drowning would take away, that's earned. So the show needs domestic scenes. Not too many, but enough. Scenes where Jane is just a mom. Scenes where the twins are just kids. Scenes where you see small joys. Because then the punishment isn't abstract, it's the destruction of a fragile life you've come to care about. And again, I'm not claiming those scenes exist exactly like that. I'm saying they're necessary for the premise to hit as hard as it wants to hit. Now, a brief note on language and translation for international viewers. Titles like this can sound over the top in English, Secret Twin Children of the Beast King, like a web novel. And maybe it is that vibe. But don't let the title fool you into thinking it can't be emotionally sharp. Some of the most devastating stories have the silliest titles. It's almost like they're baiting you. Come for the absurd hook, stay for the pain. That's a whole business model. Rehook, and if you're still here listening to me rant, you already know the hook worked, because you're imagining the moment Darius learns the truth, and you're wondering whether you want him to suffer, change, or both. That's the engine. Anticipation. I'm going to keep digging into Darius's psychology, because it's central. A king who can sentence drowning for theft has a worldview where fear equals stability. That worldview doesn't come from nowhere. It's often inherited too. If the show hints that Darius's rule is shaped by tradition, by expectations that a beast king must be ruthless, then his cruelty becomes part of a larger machine. Not excused. Explained. An explanation is what gives the story room to explore change without turning it into fairy tale. But here's the key, explanation must not become exoneration. The story can show why Darius is the way he is and still treat his choices as his responsibility. Otherwise it becomes one of those dramas that romanticizes abusive power, and I'm not interested in that. Jane's trauma, on the other hand, is not institutional, it's personal plus systemic. She was harmed by a person and by a world. That double harm is why she's hiding. And that's why the drowning sentence is such a cruel repetition, it's the person and the world aligning again against her. That alignment is the core horror of the premise. Now, I want to talk about the idea of justice in this story, because the twins are judged as thieves, and Jane is sentenced, and Darius doesn't know who she is. That's injustice in 3 layers: mislabeling, disproportionate punishment, and ignorance. The show is basically screaming, this is what happens when justice is detached from empathy. Empathy is not softness. Empathy is information. It's context. It's the ability to understand motives. Without it, law becomes violence. Rehook, so the real villain might not be Darius as a man, but Darius as the face of a system that punishes without understanding. And if that's true, then even if he changes, the system might not. That's where the drama could go from personal tragedy to societal critique. Again, it might not go that far. But the premise supports it. Now, I need to be careful here because I'm not allowed to invent additional characters. But I can talk about the general presence of court, and judgment, and guards, because those are implied by being judged and sentenced. The way those background figures behave matters. If the guards treat Jane like she's already dead, it shows how normalized violence is. If the court reacts to the con theft with outrage that feels ceremonial rather than emotional, it shows how ritualized power is. Ritual is how cruelty becomes normal. And the show's direction can highlight that ritual. Symmetrical framing. Formal blocking. Repetitive gestures. The kind of choreography that makes punishment feel like theater. Meanwhile, Jane's life in hiding should feel improvisational. Asymmetrical. Messy. Uncertain. That contrast is the story's emotional truth. Rehook, and if the show visually blurs that contrast, if everything looks equally polished, then the themes will feel hollow. But if it leans into it, you'll feel the class divide in your bones. I also want to talk about the concept of abandonment as a character wound. Jane was abandoned in the abyss. That kind of abandonment can make someone either collapse or become fiercely self-reliant. Jane seems like the latter, but self-reliance has a cost. You stop asking for help even when you need it. You stop trusting even when someone might be safe. You become isolated. Isolation is protective until it's not. Isolation is what forces the twins to steal. Because if you have no network, you have no options. So Jane's trauma response becomes a plot driver. That's good writing if it's intentional. And the show can show that through small behaviors. Jane might hesitate before accepting anything. She might stockpile. She might teach the twins not to speak to strangers. Those are trauma behaviors, and they are logical. Darius, by contrast, might be surrounded by people constantly. But power creates a different isolation. No one tells you truth. No one challenges you. So he is socially surrounded but morally alone. And that moral loneliness is how kings become cruel without noticing. That parallel, Jane alone in survival, Darius alone in power, is interesting. It also sets up potential for thematic collision. They are both isolated, but one isolation is imposed, the other is chosen and maintained. Rehook, what happens when those isolations collide? When survival logic meets throne logic. That's where the story becomes combustible. Now, I want to talk about the title again, because Secret Twins implies eventual reveal. It's Chekhov's twin. But the reveal isn't the end point, it's the midpoint. The reveal should explode relationships. It should force decisions. It should create new dangers. If the reveal simply solves everything, the show wastes its own setup. And that's why I'm excited and cautious at the same time. Excited because the premise is built for emotional detonation. Cautious because many dramas don't know how to handle the aftermath of detonation. They either rush into forgiveness or they drag out misunderstandings artificially. The best version lets consequences breathe. Jane doesn't forgive quickly. The twins don't trust quickly. Darius doesn't get to be a father without earning it through actions that cost him something real. Now, because I'm supposed to have a natural on-camera voice, let me just be honest, if this drama tries to make me swoon over Darius without making him face the drowning sentence, I will not swoon. I will glare at my screen like it personally insulted me. I will become my own beast king in my living room. That's my promise. Okay, back to analysis. The con, as catalyst, also offers a neat thematic line. Hair ornaments are about presentation. They're about image. They're about how you're seen. Stealing it is like stealing the king's image. Jane, who is blind, exists outside image. She's judged without being seen as herself. There's a whole thing there about visibility and invisibility. Jane is invisible socially. Darius is hypervisible. The twins are invisible by necessity but feared as if they were visible. The cond is a visible symbol that becomes invisible when stolen, then visible again as evidence. That's a lot of visibility games. If the show uses mirrors, veils, shadows, it can reinforce that theme visually. Rehook, and isn't it kind of poetic that the blind woman is the one whose truth is unseen by everyone else? That kind of irony is exactly what the premise is built on. Now, I'm going to continue unpacking the likely emotional beats without inventing plot specifics. After a sentence like drowning is delivered, a story has to deal with immediate stakes, escape, appeal, intervention, delay. Whatever form that takes, the emotional focus should remain on Jane and the twins' bond under pressure. A lot of dramas would shift into action mode here. Chase scenes, rescues, powers flaring. That can be fun. But the drama's strongest asset is emotional dread. The fear of losing someone you love. The guilt of causing their danger. The rage at the system. If it turns into pure action, it risks losing what makes it unique. So I hope, even if there's action, it's emotionally grounded. The twins aren't little superheroes. They are kids in over their heads. Jane isn't an action heroine, she's a survivor with limitations. That's what makes it tense. And if the show uses the dragon element, it should come with cost. Power should not be free. If the twins have any kind of dragon strength, it should scare them too. Kids don't want to be monsters. They want to be loved. The tragedy is being forced into monstrousness. Rehook, what if the twins' dragon side isn't the threat, but the defense the world forces them to grow? That's the kind of writing that makes fantasy meaningful. Now, let's talk about how a drama like this can manipulate audience loyalty. It's going to position Jane and the twins as underdogs, obviously. It's also going to tempt some viewers to romanticize Darius because power is seductive and because some audiences love the "cold king melt" trope. The show's ethical line is how it handles that temptation. Does it glamorize cruelty? Or does it show power as corrosive? I'm not against complicated attraction in fiction. People are messy. But the narrative should not ask us to ignore harm. It can ask us to watch it, grapple with it, even understand it. But not ignore it. Jane's abandonment is the wound that makes Darius hard to romanticize for me. Because abandonment after sacrifice is not a misunderstanding, it's a character decision. Even if he believed she died, the fact remains, she sacrificed for him and she was not protected. The story says she was left behind. That's damning. Now, it's possible the show later complicates what "left behind" means. But I can't assume that. All I have is the premise, and the premise wants us to feel betrayal. We hook, so when people ask, can Darius be redeemed, my question is, can the story redeem him without betraying Jane's reality? Because that's the real tightrope. Now, I want to bring in the idea of class more explicitly, because it's implied by the power dynamic. The king has ornaments. The poor steal ornaments to buy medicine or safety or whatever they need. The court has time to judge. The hidden have no time to explain. That's class. And class is often reinforced by language. If the court speaks in formal, polished phrases, and Jane speaks in practical, urgent phrases, you hear the class divide. If Darius's voice is calm and Jane's voice trembles, you hear power. Those are performance choices. Also, the show's lighting can emphasize class, bright, even lighting in the palace, dim, uneven lighting in hiding. The palace has clarity. The hidden have shadows. Jane's blindness complicates that visually, but it can also be used. The world is visually clear to us, but it's not clear to her. That's a way to make the audience feel privileged, and maybe guilty. We hook, are we, as viewers, aligned with Darius's perspective because we can see everything, while Jane can't? And if so, does the show challenge that alignment? That's a spicy question. I don't know if the drama goes there, but it could. Now, I'm going to keep going, because we have a lot of runway left emotionally, and I want to talk about what the half-dragon element could mean thematically beyond stigma. Dragons are often symbols of greed, power, destruction, and also protection. A dragon hoards. A dragon guards. A dragon burns. A dragon is feared and revered. If the twins are half-dragon, they might carry that symbolic duality, the potential to destroy and the potential to protect. Jane, raising them, might be trying to teach them restraint, empathy, humanity. But the world might only respond to their dragon side. If people only fear them, they might lean into fear. That's how you create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And Darius, as Beast King, might see them as threats to order. Not because they did something wrong, but because they are something the system can't categorize safely. Systems hate categories that blur. Half this, half that. Secrets. Unofficial heirs. Those things destabilize. We hook, and isn't it wild that the twins are destabilizing just by existing? That's the kind of existential injustice that makes stories like this hurt. Now, I'm going to talk about the emotional texture of hiding, because it's not just a plot state. Hiding is a psychological state. It changes how you move, how you speak, how you breathe. It changes your relationship to joy. You don't celebrate loudly. You don't relax fully. You're always listening. Jane's blindness intensifies that. She is always listening anyway. So hiding becomes her entire sensory world. That's exhausting. That's why I want the show to show her fatigue. Not just physical, but spiritual. The kind where you're tired of being afraid but you keep being afraid because you have no choice. And then the twins, kids are not built to hide. Kids want to run, shout, explore. So hiding becomes a constant conflict between Jane's need for secrecy and the twins' need for childhood. That's a beautiful, painful tension. If the drama captures it, it'll feel intimate. If it ignores it, it'll feel shallow. We hook, how much of the twins' theft is about saving Jane, and how much of it is about finally refusing to live small? That question is juicy because it complicates the act. It becomes not only love, but rebellion. Now, because we're in a YouTube review voice, let me paint one more sensory moment. Imagine the twins returning from the theft. They are breathing hard. Their hands are shaking. They are holding the cond like it's hot. Jane reaches out, not seeing it, just sensing their panic. Her fingers brush the ornament, and it's cold metal, smooth, expensive. She doesn't need to see it to know it doesn't belong to them. She hears their voices, too fast, too urgent. She knows they did something dangerous. And the love in her chest turns into fear so fast it's almost nausea. That's a mother's nightmare. Your child did something for you that could get them killed. And then, later, in the judgment, the same object becomes evidence. The same cold metal becomes a death sentence. That's storytelling symmetry. That's effective. Rehook, and the irony is, Jane can't even look at the cond and curse it. She has to feel its coldness with her fingertips and hear the consequences with her ears. Okay. Now I want to talk about how the show might handle sympathy for Darius, and how it should handle it. If the drama wants to show Darius as conflicted, it should not do it through soft lighting and sad music alone. It should do it through choices. Does he question the severity of drowning? Does he seek more information? Does he notice the twins' desperation? Does he care that children are involved? Or does he only care that his symbol was touched? The line between conflicted ruler and romanticized tyrant is drawn by behavior, not by facial attractiveness. And yes, I'm saying that because I know how these dramas work. The camera loves a pretty face. The narrative should still hold him accountable. Jane's sympathy, meanwhile, is built in. But the show should still allow her to be flawed. Survival makes people do things they regret. Secrecy makes people lie. Trauma makes people harsh. If Jane snaps at the twins sometimes, if she makes mistakes, that doesn't make her less sympathetic. It makes her real. And reality is what makes tragedy hit. Rehook, if Jane is written as flawless, the story becomes a saint narrative. If she's written as human, the story becomes a mirror. Now, I'm going to keep building because we're not near the finish, and we're not even at the point where I talk about whether I recommend it. I want to explore the theme of recognition again, because it's the emotional jackpot. Recognition is not just Darius recognizes Jane. It's Jane recognizing her own worth. It's the twins recognizing their identity beyond fear. It's society recognizing that thief is not an essence. Recognition can also be violent. When secrets are revealed, recognition can lead to exploitation. The twins being recognized as heirs could make them targets. Jane being recognized as the mother could make her a threat. Recognition isn't automatically salvation. It's exposure. That's why secrecy is such a complicated shield. It protects and isolates. Recognition frees and endangers. The characters are trapped between those poles. Rehook, would you rather be safe and unseen, or seen and in danger? The drama is forcing that choice. Now, I want to talk about audience emotional manipulation one more time. The drowning sentence is designed to make you furious. Fury is an addictive viewing emotion. It keeps you engaged because you want correction. But fury can also burn out. The show needs to transform fury into something else over time: suspense, strategy, moral complexity, maybe even bittersweet hope. If it keeps you in fury too long, you become numb. If it resolves fury too quickly, it feels unearned. The pacing of emotional release is everything. And the most satisfying release in this kind of story isn't necessarily revenge. It's truth landing. It's someone in power finally being forced to see what they did. It's an apology that costs something. It's a choice of mercy that risks stability. Those are releases that feel earned. Rehook, so if you're watching only for revenge, you might get it, but the story's real power is in whether it earns recognition and accountability. Now, a quick note for critics who might roll their eyes at the fantasy melodrama packaging. Yes, it's heightened. Yes, it's fate-heavy. But heightened stories can still be craftful. In fact, heightened stories require craft because they can't hide behind realism. They have to build their own emotional logic. And this premise has emotional logic. It's cruel, but it's coherent.